I can finally speak unvarnished truth to power and say what I really think about Donald Trump, starting right now.
I don't have any fear of the administration doing anything to me. I mean, how silly would it be?
Stephen Colbert was once the most powerful voice in American late-night television. But on May 21, 2026, his chair inside the Ed Sullivan Theater sat empty for the last time. CBS called it a financial decision. Critics called it something far more troubling, because the cancellation came just days after one sentence from Colbert turned an ordinary comedy monologue into a corporate crisis. Behind the ratings, the budget cuts, and the official statements was a question CBS never fully escaped. Was this really the end of a late-night show? Or was it the moment American television proved how dangerous one sentence could still be? The final night in the sanctuary. Before that question could be answered, the fans outside the Ed Sullivan Theater were already beginning to feel the weight of the final night. This was no longer just another taping. To them, it was a farewell to a man who had entered America's living rooms for more than a decade. By 10 a.m., lines had wrapped around the building. Some fans had flown in from California and Texas just to be there. One had been waiting since 4 a.m., even though CBS had kept the entire guest list for the final week under wraps. That silence only made the atmosphere outside the theater feel even stranger. All through the night before the finale, fans kept guessing who might appear to say goodbye. Some thought George Clooney would return, since he had been Colbert's very first guest in 2015. Others imagined a former president. A few even whispered about the Vatican. But when the lights came up, none of those rumors mattered. It was Paul McCartney. More than 60 years earlier, the Beatles had made their American debut on that very stage. McCartney walked out holding a framed photo from that night. For a moment, he and Colbert simply stood facing each other in the middle of the theater. Colbert leaned in and said something quietly. The cameras caught McCartney nodding before wiping his eyes. To this day, no one knows what Colbert told him. Before that emotional moment, the show had tried to hide the pain with comedy. Bryan Cranston came out first, acting as if he deserved to be the final guest. Paul Rudd followed. Then came Tig Notaro, Ryan Reynolds, and Elijah Wood, all pretending to fight for the last spot. The audience laughed, but in the back rows, some fans were already crying. That night, the show ran 17 minutes over. It was the exact same overtime David Letterman received for his 2015 finale. CBS never said whether it was planned as a tribute or simply a coincidence. Then the studio lights began to fade. First the main lights, then the backlights. Finally, only one amber spotlight remained, falling directly on Colbert's desk. Remember that amber light. It will matter later. Colbert stood beneath it for 47 seconds without saying anything. Then the room exploded. The applause lasted 8 straight minutes until the crew finally turned on the house lights to let everyone know it was over. But to understand why that silence felt so unbearable, we have to go back 10 months, to the 3 days that changed everything. 3 fateful days. Those 3 days began with a settlement that many people in the media world still could not explain. On July 2, 2025, Paramount agreed to pay Donald Trump $16 million to settle a lawsuit over Kamala Harris's interview on 60 Minutes. Many media lawyers believed Trump's case was unlikely to win, but the amount was impossible to ignore. The timing made it look even worse. Paramount was trying to complete an $8 billion merger with Skydance, a deal that needed approval from the FCC. At the time, the agency was led by a Trump appointee. To critics, the settlement no longer looked like a legal decision. It looked like a message. 12 days later, Colbert walked onto the stage and said what many people were already thinking. He described the settlement as a bribe. According to people close to the show, even his own team did not know the line was coming. His head writer had not been warned. His producers had not been told. In that moment, Colbert did what fans had always loved him for. He said the quiet part out loud. 3 days later, on July 17, 2025, CBS announced that The Late Show with Stephen Colbert would end. The network said it was purely a financial decision. CBS insisted it had nothing to do with the show's content, nothing to do with Colbert's performance, and nothing to do with Paramount. But no one could explain why that financial decision came just 3 days after Colbert used the word bribe. The reaction was immediate. Senator Elizabeth Warren called for a congressional investigation. Donald Trump posted online that he was glad Colbert had been fired. The next night, Colbert brought that post onto the air. He repeated Trump's reaction, paused, and answered with the kind of sharp, wounded humor only he could deliver. The final insult was bleeped, but everyone understood the message. The clip exploded online, reaching more than 100 million views in its first week. Fans laughed because it was funny, but many also knew they might be watching a man fight for the show he had already lost. CBS kept saying it was all about money. The problem was, the numbers told a very different story. The $40 million lie. And that was why CBS's explanation never sat right with the people who had watched Colbert carry late night for years. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert had been #1 in late night for 9 straight seasons. It was the longest winning streak in the history of the Late Show brand, even going back to the David Letterman era. Among viewers aged 18 to 49, Colbert had been beating The Tonight Show since 2019 and never gave up the lead. Even near the end, the audience was still there. During its second-to-last week, the Strike Force 5 reunion brought in 4.1 million viewers, the biggest late-night broadcast number in 3 years. The Letterman episode that same week drew 3.7 million. Both crushed the competition. Then, on September 14, 2025, just 2 months after CBS announced the cancellation, The Late Show won the Emmy for Outstanding Talk Series. It was the first time a broadcast late-night show had ever won that category. And yet, CBS still claimed the show was losing $40 million a year. Jimmy Kimmel was one of the first to question it publicly. On ABC, he argued that the number made no sense because it ignored affiliate fees, the money local stations pay CBS to carry its nightly programming. According to the internal figures Kimmel cited, once that money was counted, The Late Show was not losing money at all. But Jon Stewart seemed to understand the deeper fear behind it. On The Daily Show, Stewart suggested people should not waste time looking for a secret email or a hidden phone call. To him, the answer was something colder: fear, pressure, and companies obeying before they were even ordered to. For Colbert's fans, that hurt because it sounded exactly like what they feared had happened. Stewart did more than speak out. During Colbert's final week, he sent him a 4-page handwritten letter. No one has ever revealed what it said. But according to one crew member at the finale, Colbert kept that letter in his breast pocket for the entire broadcast. And then one more voice stepped forward. The man who had built the Late Show name in the first place could not stay silent anymore. Letterman's wrath. David Letterman had almost vanished from public life after retiring in 2015. For nearly a decade, he gave only a few interviews and said almost nothing about CBS, the network where he had spent 22 years. But in May 2026, he finally broke his silence. When the New York Times asked about CBS canceling Colbert, Letterman did not soften his answer. He said the network was lying, and the line was harsh enough to become headlines across the country. 3 days earlier, Letterman had returned to the Ed Sullivan Theater for the first time in almost 10 years. He and Colbert filmed a bit on the roof, throwing old office furniture down onto a giant CBS logo below. It played like comedy, but to people who knew the history, it felt like anger finally breaking through. Then Letterman looked into the camera, echoed Edward R. Murrow's famous farewell to CBS, and added one final insult the broadcast refused to air in full. One small detail about the theater made Colbert's goodbye hurt even more. Letterman had once used a private walkway from his dressing room to the stage. Colbert never used it. For 11 years, he walked through the main hallway every night, greeting the crew members who helped build the show with him. That was why so many people took the cancellation personally. When the news broke, John Oliver, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, and Seth Meyers all defended him. Together with Colbert, they were known as Strike Force 5, a bond formed during the 2023 writers' strike when they raised money for their out-of-work staffs. Oliver condemned CBS. Kimmel mocked the network's logic. Fallon, usually careful on air, grew emotional while remembering how late night had shaped his childhood. On Colbert's final night, Fallon and Kimmel did something almost unheard of. They aired reruns of their own shows so they could sit in the Ed Sullivan Theater for their friend. These were his direct rivals, men who fought him for ratings every night. But that night, they gave up airtime just to be there. The photo of the 5 hosts sitting together, red-eyed and silent, spread everywhere. Hollywood was mourning Colbert. But CBS was already counting the money, and the person chosen to replace him was about to reveal something even colder than the lie. The sold-out time slot. On May 22, 2026, just one day after Colbert's finale, CBS filled the 11:35 p.m. slot with a very different show, Comics Unleashed, hosted by Byron Allen. Allen was not some unknown replacement. He had first appeared on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show in 1979, when he was only 18. Over the decades, he built Allen Media Group into a massive media business, with holdings that included the Weather Channel, the Griot, part of Starz, and a major stake in BuzzFeed. But the real story was not the host. It was the deal. Allen did not simply replace Colbert. He bought the time slot from CBS. He paid the production costs, sold the ads, and accepted the risk. CBS no longer had to spend money on the 11:35 p.m. hour. Industry reports said the model could save the network more than $150 million a year. So maybe purely a financial decision did not mean Colbert's show had failed. Maybe it meant CBS no longer wanted to pay for late night at all. That was the painful part. A #1 show was no longer treated like a legacy. It was treated like an expense. In a leaked Paramount Skydance report, executives reportedly called it portfolio simplification. To fans, it sounded colder than that. It sounded like Wall Street looking at television and deciding the Soul was too expensive. There was one strange, heartbreaking detail. On the morning of September 14, 2025, the same day Colbert would win his Emmy, he had breakfast with Byron Allen. According to Allen, they talked for hours about Johnny Carson, comedy, and their shared love of television. Both men knew what was coming. One was about to lose the chair he had carried for years. The other was about to inherit the time slot generations of comedians had dreamed about. After Allen signed the deal, Colbert texted him congratulations. He even joked that he wished they could both tell Johnny Carson about it. It was a graceful moment between two men trapped inside a very ungraceful business deal. David Letterman later summed it up in 7 blunt words. He said CBS simply did not want to spend money, and maybe that was the whole tragedy. They did not cancel Colbert because the show had failed. They canceled him because making something great was more expensive than replacing it with something cheaper. And inside the nearly century-old theater where it all happened, there were still secrets only Colbert knew. Secrets inside the century. Old walls. To understand what CBS was walking away from, you have to understand the room Colbert was leaving behind. The Ed Sullivan Theater was never just a studio. Built in 1927, it had become part of American memory. Elvis appeared there. The Beatles made their American television debut on that stage in 1964. David Letterman later turned it into the home of modern late night. By the time Colbert arrived, he was not just taking over a show. He was stepping into a shrine, and he treated it that way. His most private place was a small room on the 5th floor. Inside were a Don Quixote statue, shelves of Tolkien books, and an olive wood cross from Bethlehem. Only his wife, Evie, was allowed in. Before every taping, Colbert would retreat there to steady himself. Then came the ritual almost no one saw. He would pray quietly in the wings, touch a small photo of his late father and 2 brothers hidden in his pocket, and step into the lights. For 11 years, he carried that grief with him every night. That is why the ending felt so cruel. After the finale, Colbert's set was dismantled and sent to the Museum of Broadcast Communications in Chicago. The theater itself remained protected by landmark rules, but CBS had not announced a new tenant. The stage was still there. The lights were still there. But the world Colbert had built inside it was gone. And he was not the only one who lost something. 200 staff members lost their jobs after the finale. Colbert later said no one was paid after May 21st. Amy Cole, his longtime assistant from the Colbert Report, sat crying in the control room until the lights went out. The building's doorman, who had worked there for 28 years, asked Colbert to sign the guest book because he believed CBS was about to throw it away. One young writer, hired only 8 months earlier, lost her job and then her Brooklyn apartment. That was the part fans could not shake. This was not just a show ending. It was a whole little world being erased. But the Ed Sullivan Theater was not the only place where Colbert carried old wounds. Behind all the success, all the applause, and all the power, there was still a 10-year-old boy inside him who had never fully healed. The man who couldn't choose his own ending. To understand why that empty stage hurt so much, you have to understand the wound Colbert had carried long before CBS ever took anything from him. On September 11, 1974, Eastern Airlines Flight 212 crashed in thick fog near Charlotte, North Carolina. On board were Stephen Colbert's father, Dr. James William Colbert, Jr., and 2 of Stephen's brothers, Peter and Paul. All 3 died. Stephen was only 10 years old. Overnight, he became the only child left at home. His older siblings had already gone off to school or work, and his mother, Lorna, was left shattered. From that day on, the names Peter and Paul never really left him. Years later, when Colbert had children of his own, he named his second son Peter. On the night of the finale, Peter sat in the audience with his siblings, Madeleine and John. For Colbert, it must have felt like 2 worlds touching, the family he lost and the family that helped him survive. His mother died in 2013, shortly before he accepted The Late Show. At her funeral, Colbert said she had taught him to see life as a gift. That line later hung in the writer's room for 11 years. Faith also became part of how he endured. Colbert is one of the few major Hollywood hosts openly devoted to Catholicism. He teaches Sunday school. During the final months at CBS, he later said his faith helped keep him from breaking. A friend also confirmed that, the week before the finale, he attended a private blessing at a Manhattan church. His wife, Evie, stayed mostly out of the spotlight. But on the final night, she stood in the wings and held his hand before he walked onto the stage one last time. After the finale, Colbert told people something that surprised many in the industry. He suggested CBS may have saved his life because doing the show every night took something out of him at the deepest level. Then he revealed something he had rarely spoken about. Before taking over The Late Show in 2015, he spent 4 months in intensive therapy, trying to manage the anxiety of replacing David Letterman. That made this ending even harder. When the Colbert Report ended in 2014, Colbert chose the date himself. He chose the shape of the goodbye, but The Late Show was different. This time, the ending was handed to him. The date was chosen for him. A man who had spent his career facing pain with humor was denied the chance to leave on his own terms. 2 days before the finale, Jon Stewart visited the studio with a gift: 2 motorized recliners, joking that Colbert would finally have time to sit back and watch old television. The audience laughed. But later, Stewart offered a more serious message. He told Colbert, in essence, to face the darkness directly and laugh at it. That had always been Colbert's way. The morning after the finale, Colbert quietly ordered breakfast for all 200 crew members. He also hand-wrote 200 cards, one for each person who had helped build the show. Some staff members later framed those notes and hung them at home. That afternoon, according to a photographer, Colbert drove alone to a cemetery in Charleston. His father and brothers, Peter and Paul, had been buried there for more than 50 years. He stood by their graves for 2 hours. No one knows what he said. And maybe that is why the question still hurts. Why was a man who gave 11 years of his life to American television pushed off the stage so suddenly? There are 4 main theories, and the country has never stopped arguing about them. 4 theories America can't stop debating. In the months after Colbert's cancellation, 4 theories took over America. The first was the backroom deal theory. Paramount needed FCC approval for its $8 billion merger with Skydance. The FCC was led by Trump appointees. To critics, the $16 million 60 Minutes settlement already looked suspicious. When CBS canceled Colbert and the FCC approved the merger just 12 days later, the timeline became hard to ignore. The second was the blacklist theory. Or at least, some feared it looked like the beginning of one. Online, people wondered if Colbert was the first major host to pay the price for criticizing Trump. After Jimmy Kimmel's brief suspension that same year, the fear felt even colder. Who would be next? The third was the pre-planned exit theory. Some believed Colbert already knew by May 2025 that CBS would not renew him. If true, the July monologue was not a mistake. It was his final act of defiance. The fourth was the saddest theory. Maybe late night itself was dying. Younger viewers had moved to YouTube, TikTok, and podcasts. In this version, Colbert was not defeated by politics. He was caught in the collapse of an old television world. 4 theories, 4 versions of the same heartbreak. None could be proven completely. But for many middle-aged Americans, it felt familiar. In 1981, CBS pushed Walter Cronkite into retirement, and the country argued just as fiercely. Was history repeating itself? And if Colbert could be removed, how many hosts would still dare to criticize power by name? Whatever theory people believed, one thing was certain. Colbert was the one who had to live with the ending. The price of truth. Colbert's life will go on. He has signed on to co-write a new Lord of the Rings project with Peter Jackson. His youngest son, John, is about to graduate from college. His younger brother is getting married. When asked about the future, Colbert kept his answer simple. He said he would be fine, the way he always tries to be. But some things will not come back. American late night has lost something it may never replace. For millions of Americans over 50, Colbert was the last face they saw before going to sleep for 11 years. The week after the finale, a 71-year-old Vietnam veteran stood outside the Ed Sullivan Theater with a handmade sign thanking Colbert for helping him laugh through the hardest nights. And maybe the truth was never that complicated. This was not about CBS being unable to afford Stephen Colbert. It was about an America where telling the truth on television every night had become too expensive for a network to defend. So the question is not just what happened to Colbert. The question is what any of us would do in his place. Would you stay quiet and keep the show? Or would you speak, lose the stage, and leave with your head still high? The show may be over, but the questions it left behind are only beginning. Inside the Ed Sullivan Theater, the lights are still rigged. The same amber spotlight from the finale is still there. The same light, the same stage. But the chair is empty now. And when Colbert walked away, he took an entire era with him.